Hey guys, so today I'm going to show you how to take apart your 351MP. This is the bit we're going to be using for the back to take off the back plate. The rubber mats don't have any screws under it, so there's only 4 screws on the back we need to take off. Now once the screws are out, make sure to take off the back very slowly as there's a cable plugged into the battery on the back. Now to remove the battery, use your fingernails and pinch on each side, pulling up slowly as you're wiggling it, and it should come out pretty easy. And I'll show you the battery just in case anyone needs to see what it looks like. Now with the battery out of the way, the next thing you want to do is to remove the triggers and the bumpers. Just pull them straight out and they'll pop out of the holes they're in. Now when you're pulling them out, just make sure they don't get hit on these switches. With that out of the way, let's take out the speakers. Now the first thing you have to do is take out this cable. Just grab each side of the plastic here and pinch and then pull it back, very slowly wiggling it. These should pop out a little easier than the battery. Now the speaker itself sits on a rail, so all you have to do is just grab each side, wiggle it back and forth, and pull it back, and it should slide right out. And there's the speaker out. Now for the other side, it's the same thing, just make sure to unplug the speaker the same way. Now the other thing we can do here is use a pair of needle nose pliers. Just pull it up very slowly, don't pinch too hard, and it should come out a lot easier. Now with the speaker wires out of the way, we can remove the joysticks. The joysticks themselves only have 2 screws, and then the ribbon cable holding them in. Now to remove the ribbon cable, all we have to do is lift up on the lock here. With the lock up, we can simply pull out the ribbon cable now. And let's just pull the ribbon cable back so it doesn't get in the way of our screwdriver. Now with the 2 screws out and the ribbon cable detached, it should just pull straight out. Here's a couple close-ups of the joystick, just in case anyone's wondering what it looks like. Now for the other side, it's the same thing, just unlock the ribbon cable and then take out the 2 screws. Again, make sure to bend the ribbon cable back just so we don't hit it with our screwdriver. And here's some close-ups of the right joystick. Next, we need to detach the ribbon cable going to the front panel. Again, just use your finger or a plastic smudge tool and lift up on the lock to disengage it. The next thing we need to do is remove the screws holding down the motherboard. There are 10 of them in total. Now before we forget, just make sure to take out your memory card. In mine, I've been using 128 gig Patriot microSD. Before we pull up on the board, we need to remove the ribbon cable attached to the screen. Just wiggle it back and forth and it should come out of the lock. Next, make sure to remove any loose screws you have sitting on your board before we lift it up. Now before we go lift up the board, just make sure you've taken out all the screws. Now to remove the board, just make sure to grab the top and then where the joysticks were, slide it down so the headphone jack comes out of the hole. Now lift up on this very slowly because the ribbon cable's still here. You have to feed it through the hole to get it through. Here's a couple close-up shots of my board for my 351MP. And here's a close-up shot of the front of the board. To take off the rubber membrane, just simply slide it up and it'll pop right off. The buttons just sit in the hole. You can take them out if you want now as well. Now an easy way to take these out is just push them from the other side and they'll pop right out. And the D-pad membrane comes off the same way. And with that, you've completely dissembled your 351MP. Now you'll notice a lot of dust that's fallen behind the screen that comes through the controls and the joysticks. Now that we're going through the process of reassembling it, just slide the membranes back on first. The membranes on the start and select buttons are actually easier to put on first before you put them in the hole. Now on the bottom you should see a little hole, just line it up with the membrane and it should slot right in. With these out, you can actually see how much travel distance they have as well. Just pop the membrane back on the ABXY buttons. And before we put anything on top, just make sure that the membranes are on and they're seated correctly. Now out of everything we just did, putting the power button back in is actually the hardest thing. The power button is very thin, so it doesn't really sit on anything either. You have to basically hold the device completely flat, otherwise it will fall out. Make sure as well you don't put the volume or power button upside down. Next, let's reinstall the motherboard. Just make sure you line up the ribbon cable so it goes through the hole before you put the motherboard down. Once you get it up to the hole, just pull it through and it should come through pretty easy. Now when you install the board again, make sure to put the top part in first before putting it down. Now the little plastic buttons might fall through as you push down. Just push the buttons out. Don't touch the switches. Just try to get the buttons out so you can push it down. Now with the board lined up, we can put back the 10 screws. Now when you're putting in the screws, don't put them all on one side first. Put a couple on one side, then put a couple on the other side to balance it out. Make sure to double check the screws just to make sure that they're lightly wrist tight before closing the back. Now to put the ribbon cable back in for the screen, just make sure that the lock is up before you push it in, line it up, and then just push it and it should go right in. Now, if you're not sure that it's in the hallway, you can use a plastic smudger tool just on the back just to push it in that last little bit. It won't go in the hallway because the lock is what pulls it down. Once you're sure it's pushed in, push down on the lock to engage it. Now the speakers themselves, make sure you keep the wires up top. It slides down on the rail with the wires up top. Line up the rail, push it down, and then wiggle it back and forth until it goes down on the lock. And do the same thing for the one on the other side. Once the lock is lined up, these go on pretty easy. Grab the speaker wire and line it up, and then just push it in from both the sides and it should slot right in. Now one thing I do note here, it's a lot easier to put this wire back on when you use 2 fingers. Now some of these joysticks you can put on upside down, just make sure that these 4 holes line up before you put it on. And make sure to pull the speaker wire out of the way so we don't pinch that. Once you're sure it's slotted in correctly, screw it in. Now for these joysticks, you want to make sure that the black part is always facing up. Once it's in, push down the lock to engage it. Again, just make sure to line it up correctly so you're not putting it on upside down. Now when I put this joystick in the first time, I wasn't sure why this ribbon cable wasn't lining up. It's because I put it in upside down. Now before I fix that joystick, let's just put these bumpers and triggers back on. They just slot into these holes up here. Again, keeping with the rule that you want the black side facing up. I also found it a lot easier to attach the joystick part first, then attach the motherboard part after. And with that joystick flipped up the right way, it sure fits a lot better. Let's fix the other one as well. I'm also going to reseat the ribbon cable on the other side just to make sure it's correctly oriented. After all that's done, you've reassembled your 351MP. All we have to do now is just reattach the battery and screw the back on. Line up the battery lead and push it into place. So when we line up the back here, just a reminder there are no snaps, so it should just fall into place, and it tightens when we put the screws in. Once we put the 4 screws in the back, that's all there is to reassembling the 351MP. Hopefully that was helpful. Thanks for watching.